Drawing and making stories can be one of the most difficult things ever. By blending the written word and symbolism, we must study the past in order to teach the future. Welcome to Farlook Studios. My name is Ray Raynette, and I'm a self-published illustrator and writer for my own comic book magazine titled Junket: Hidden Worlds Revealed. On this channel, we look back at different forms of art and see what it is we can take away from it in order to apply it to our day-to-day lives. As a practicing artist, I always look back to see what it is I could reference or find inspiration from and apply it into my modern-day work. If you guys like the content I make here, don't forget to hit a thumbs up, subscribe, and put notifications on to stay updated. Now, on to the video.
Jack Kirby is an important name for you to know because Jack Kirby's career spans the entire history of comic books, from the early 30s right up to today. Jack Kirby, when he began, had one of the most energetic styles of any artist. His work practically leaps off the page at you. In the 60s, he went to work for Marvel Comics, where he created the Fantastic Four, the Hulk, the Silver Surfer, and a host of other characters that you all know, in collaboration with a man named Stan Lee. This was the basis of the new Marvel House of Ideas, and it again revolutionized comics. And Marvel Comics became the most popular in the world. In the 70s, he worked for another comic house, DC, and created the Fourth World, Kirby's Fourth World. There were three comics: the Forever People, the New Gods, and Mr. Miracle. And in this triumvirate of comics, he created a whole new universe of characters with a lifestyle and with a philosophy that was his alone.
I see that story first. I feel that story first. I know those people first. When I put them down, they've already lived. And I put them down as I'd like them to live on those pages. My stories are very sincere. My stories are people's stories. And there's elements in my stories that are very, very real. And it doesn't matter what the subject is. And I've done stories in a wide range of subjects. My inspirations were the fact that I had to make sales. And I had to come up with characters that were no longer stereotypes. In other words, I couldn't depend on gangsters. I had to get something new. And of course, for some reason, I went to the Bible. I came up with Galactus. And there I was in front of this tremendous figure who I knew very well because I've always felt him, and I certainly couldn't treat him in the same way that I would any ordinary mortal. And I remember in my first story, I had to back away from him to resolve that story. And of course, the Silver Surfer is the fallen angel. And when Galactus relegated him to Earth, he stayed on Earth. And that was the beginning of his adventures. And they were figures that had never before been used in comics. They were above mythic figures. And of course, they were the first gods. And I began thinking along those lines. And the new gods evolved from those lines. And I began to ask myself, everybody else had their gods, what are ours? What is the shape of our society in the form of myth and legend? Who are our gods? Who are our evil gods? And who are our good ones? And I tried to resolve them in the new gods. And I came up with some very, very interesting characters and very good sales, which satisfied me immensely. Now, I didn't resolve the questions. I'm a guy who lives with a lot of questions. I say, what's out there? And I try to resolve that, and I never can. I don't think anybody can. Who's got the answers? I sure would like to hear the ultimate one, but I haven't yet. And so I live with a lot of questions, and I find that entertaining. I find that entertaining. And if my life would have went tomorrow, it would be fulfilled in that manner. I would say the questions have been terrific. The comic book medium itself is special. It's something that was, that's a result of evolvement. From what I understand, the editorial comic was first. And then they added a few panels to that and you had a comic strip. And they added a few pages to that and you had a comic book. And what we can add to the comic book, we may have to think about that. So I believe that's the interesting part of the entire field, is to say, what is it? Where is it going? How it'll evolve? And we experiment with that every day.
All through the years, certainly, I've had a kind of affection for any mythological type of character, and here Stan gave me the opportunity to draw one, and I wasn't going to draw back from really letting myself go. So I did, and the world became a stage for me. I gave the Norse characters twists that they never had in anybody's imagination. And somehow it turned out to be a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed doing it.
Hi, this is Stan Lee, and I think it's time that we talk about the mighty Thor. You know, it's funny. I had created a number of superheroes for Marvel, and I worked mainly with a wonderful artist named Jack Kirby, and one day Jack and I were talking. We wanted to do another hero, and Jack said, well, what can we do now? We've got the Hulk, who's the strongest guy in the world, and we have Spider-Man, who climbs walls, blah, blah, blah. Who can we get that's even bigger and better and stronger? And it occurred to me, the only thing we could do, perhaps, is come up with a god. I thought it would be fun to make a god a hero. So, I'm not the world's greatest authority on gods, but I brushed up a little on the Roman gods, and I said, we've seen a lot of them. Looked into the Greek gods, well, everybody knows them. And then I stumbled on the Norse gods, and I realized they're not as well known. So I was reading about them, and then I came across the mighty Thor, god of thunder. And I liked the idea that he could create storms, that he was one of the strongest, if not the strongest, of all the Norse gods. And I especially liked the idea that he had a hammer. And I figured, what a weapon. Not a gun, it's not a knife, it's not a bomb, a hammer. I'm lucky it wasn't a screwdriver. It could have been a pair of pliers. But I think a hammer is really dramatic. Now, I want to show you how scientific we were at Marvel Comics. I needed a method for Thor to fly, to go from Asgard, which is the home of the gods, to the Earth. I didn't want him to just say, I think I'll get going, and bingo, we see him fly. If you ever thought about it, Superman flies with no visible means of propulsion. But I wanted Thor to have a real method of flying. So I figured he'll take his hammer and put a little leather thong and wrap it around his wrist. And then he'll swing the hammer very fast, like a propeller. And when it gets going at top speed, he'll let it go. Now the hammer will go flying off, but because the thong is tied to his wrist, it'll pull him along with it. So you see, everything I ever wrote was scientifically sound, and nobody could criticize it or fault it. And speaking of criticizing and faulting, I hope you won't find any fault with the cartoons you're about to see. I envy you the fun you're gonna have. Enjoy.
Welcome to a fascinating exploration into the world of Jack Kirby and his masterful integration of mythology and religious iconography within his comic book creations. Kirby, often referred to as the King of Comics, drew inspiration from a rich tapestry of myths, legends, fables, and most notably, biblical scripture. His stories are layered with symbolism that resonates with readers on multiple levels. His iconic series Journey into Mystery, specifically in the Tales of Thor, Kirby masterfully intertwines Norse mythology with Greek and Old Testament symbolism. In the early issues, Thor would often be depicted praying and displaying acts of valor, which echoes the figure of Saint Michael. He isn't the traditional Norse god Thor with red hair and horns. He is seen here as with long, blonde, flowing hair and a winged helmet. Thor is always shown fighting his half-brother Loki, the god of deception and trickery, which embodies the traits of Lucifer, the fallen angel. Odin, the All-Father, represents the God of the Old Testament, a powerful and sometimes wrathful deity. The character of Don Blake, Thor's mortal disguise, symbolizes human weakness and the need for faith, with his staff alluding to Moses, which acts as a divine intervention. As soon as he stamps the staff on the ground, he doesn't split the ocean, but he becomes stronger than he was before. Normally depicted as a cripple, with the staff, he becomes the Son of God. Within the backup stories of Journey into Mystery and the Mighty Thor, there is a bonus story, normally 5 pages long, titled Tales of Asgard. In this series, Kirby further expands on these mythological roots. From the Norse myth of Odin fighting the ice giants, Kirby alludes to the battle of Zeus against the Cyclopses, with a bolt of lightning shooting out of his hands. These earlier stories derive from the truth found within scripture, where the great kings of men would fight up against giants in the Nephilim. Within Tales of Asgard, Kirby further emphasizes this with demons that evoke the imagery of hell and Norse trolls, which fight alongside an ancient Greek-looking Hydra. These stories are rich in mythological crossover. He draws from the classic fables like Jack and the Beanstalk, where a young Thor and Loki climb up into the house of giants and attack them while they eat supper. There is another story titled The Invasion of Asgard, which alludes to the biblical war that happened in the heavens before the creation of Earth. There are constantly themes of witchcraft, demons, giants, and serpents. Jack Kirby most definitely took influences from all over the world, and not simply Norse mythology. He would reconstruct them, reuse them, repurpose them, in order to re-engage with these ancient symbols and teach a new story to a new generation with the same morals. Within the invasion of Asgard, a young Thor is slowly turned into a tree, which echoes the Greek myth of Daphne and Apollo, where Daphne, running away from Apollo's advances, gets turned into a tree herself. There is a famous statue sculpted by a student of Michelangelo named Gian Lorenzo Bernini. There is another famous story within the Tales of Asgard, which is the first appearance of Hela, the goddess of death. Within this story, a young Thor struggles to lift up Mjolnir's hammer, his father's weapon that is right to rule the kingdom. This is a clear echoing of King Arthur's Excalibur, where only he who is worthy may lift the weapon from the stone. Kirby would later depict Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table within the Superpowers comic strip as just a small tease. After Thor is confronted with the goddess of death, he has to face a problem, whether or not he lets his friend die. Thor then does the unthinkable, and he does something that Hela has never seen anyone do for anyone ever. He decides instead to die in his friend's place and sacrifice himself. This clearly alludes to the sacrificial stories of Prometheus and the Christ figure, where Prometheus gave fire to humanity and was placed by Zeus on a mountaintop to be stabbed by his side and eaten by vultures, later on to be saved by the Son of God, Hercules. In Christianity, the same story echoes profoundly, with the simplicity of just having the two characters, the two figures that represent the sacrificial lamb, the offering. The Son of God, Christ himself, is placed on top of the mountain in Golgotha and is stabbed at the side with a spear, only to be resurrected once again by his Father. Jack Kirby's storytelling also includes adventures, missions, and quests to mythical lands, like in the short Tales of Asgard story, Mission to Mimir's. Thor ventures amongst the cave of the dwarves and is given a gift of a flying ship that hurls through the sky. He then docks at a mysterious land where he fights against demons, boar monsters, dragons, and even assists in creating humanity itself by giving Mimir, the god of wisdom, a simple twig from Yggdrasil, the world tree, and the magical living waters of the fountain of youth and knowledge. They are able to grow the first trees and seeds that form into man. Kirby does not only take influence from the Norse creation myth, but he depicts it in a more biblical manner, as though it were Adam and Eve. Some of these stories actually get to make it into the main title. In Journey into Mystery, the storyline of giants walk the earth, Odin is found descending from heaven disguised as a mortal man and draws clear parallels to the biblical tales. Hebrews 13:2 states, "Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have entertained angels without knowing it." Within this specific story of Thor, Odin, hidden as a human man, decides not only to save the city, but the world from the threat of giants and demons, with the aid of his fellow Vikings from Asgard. There is a very clear connotation to this story and the story of Abraham pleading to God to not destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. For God came down from heaven alongside 2 angels and was given hospitality. Though the city was far from redemption, he still spared the innocents by allowing them to flee beforehand. In the story of Thor, Odin does this exact same thing. He moves his hand, stopping time and moving all of the people from Earth and all of the innocents to another dimension, safe from the battleground that Earth has become. This is probably one of my favorite images drawn by Kirby, because it really does allude to the sort of rapture and day of judgment that we're all aware of. But Kirby continues to merge ideas with one another, truly making this never-ending well of ideas and opportunities. Within 2 separate short stories, Thor meets Sigurd, and in another, he meets Fafnir the dragon. These names are taken directly from Sigurd the Dragon Slayer. In this classic myth, after the man defeats the dragon, he bathes in his blood and becomes invincible, similar to that of Achilles. After reading so much Thor, I noticed that Stan Lee and Kirby really stopped having ideas and just kind of started adding in fairy tales. They literally just full-on remade Red Riding Hood, but instead it was about the Golden Apple myth, which is a symbolic myth representing the Golden Apple which started the Trojan War in the Book of Iliad. Jack Kirby was really having fun with these stories, and you can see he was coming to a point where he thought the story needs to end because they didn't know where else to go. So within the backup features, Kirby actually started planting the seeds for the finale of the story. There are many trials and tribulations that Thor comes through. They sometimes can be seen aboard ships, fighting queens and evil goddesses that want to marry Thor. These are all alluding to the Odyssey and the Divine Comedy. But similarly to the title stated, returning home does not solve all the answers. From this point forward, the story takes a much darker turn, where Odin receives prophecies and confirmation about the inevitable end days, the Ragnarok. It is prophesied within this story that Thor is to fight his brother Loki till the ends of the earth, and they are both to perish. Kirby knew that he wanted to eliminate the trace of all of these characters. He wanted the story to conclude as it should have within the mythology itself. The world as we know it has come to an end. But Kirby knew that there would always be a spark for the future. As Kirby mentioned, these are the old gods, but still, there will be again the new gods. Within the new gods, there is much more biblical prophecy and much more biblical narrative and names woven in, such as Isaiah, New Genesis, Apocalypse, Dark Side, the Mother Boxes, the Force, and many, many more crazy ideas that are combining science fiction with biblical narrative. If you haven't seen it yet, I actually made a full-length video talking about Jack Kirby's Lost Universe that combines the overarching narrative of Jack Kirby's Thor, New Gods, and Captain Victory. In that video, I actually speak about Kirby's entire career from start to finish. I start off from his earliest work in Mercury, where he depicts the god Hermes fighting against the devil. I then go on and continue to speak about his work over at Marvel. Then he leaves and goes to DC, and he leaves both and ends up working for PC Comics, Pacific Comics, where he becomes one of the first, most recognizable big names that leaves the mainstream comics to promote his self-published work. I highly recommend that you guys go watch that one for a more in-depth analysis of Kirby's work as a whole. But here, I just want to continue speaking about his mythological and biblical influences. Ultimately, neither Marvel nor Stan Lee wanted Thor and his characters to die. Thor was one of the most successful comics at the time, so it would have made things kind of strange to just end the story right there and then. Thankfully, Kirby continues working on Thor and makes it even better than any other book he's ever made personally. Thor continues his battles with Hercules and the other gods, which bring forth the imagery of the Greek mythology. He not only brings in Hercules, but the entire world and pantheon of these Greek gods within a hidden mountain. There's always this back and forth between Thor and Hercules trying to top each other because they're basically the same character symbolically. They're both sons of the main god. Unexpectedly, Jack Kirby takes a lot of influence from Michelangelo and other Renaissance artists. Specifically, he mirrored the image of the Pietà sculpted by Michelangelo. This is one of the most well-known and symbolic imagery around the world. This is an image of the dead Christ, the young Son of God, dead in his parents' arms. This is a clear connection between the two images, and not only brings to mind the idea of Thor being Saint Michael, but also as him being the Son of Man, the Son of God, and Christ's ultimate sacrifice for humanity. These themes of mythology and religion do not only end at Thor, they continue on seeping into Kirby's work throughout his entire lifetime as a comic illustrator. It really does just weave itself into the narrative and just makes the characters go through these crazy life-changing experiences. In arguably one of the best Fantastic Four stories, they encounter this intergalactic being named Galactus. And of course he has a capital letter G on his chest, because that's how you know that he's a god. And of course we have the iconic Silver Surfer, which is this fallen angel from the heavens. Kirby himself has stated this and says that this is a character archetype that we don't often see portrayed. Stan Lee absolutely loved writing Silver Surfer. He introduced him as a being who was an outsider looking in. The Silver Surfer was not only willing to fight against Galactus himself, but he was looking around at the world, amazed at what we've done, and noticed that it was all worth fighting for. Galactus is this otherworldly being, bigger than life itself. To him, planets are little more than just something to feast. To him, Earth is little more than a pit stop to regain some energy, and humanity is simply an anthill in his way.
The other character that I liked was called the Silver Surfer. I worked with an artist who was the greatest, named Jack Kirby. I don't think my stories would have looked as good if Jack hadn't done some of them, because he was brilliant. In fact, all the artists were brilliant. There was John Romita and Steve Ditko and John Buscema. I was the luckiest guy alive, because I think I could have done a mediocre story. They made them look as though the stories were great, because they were so beautifully drawn. One of the most important things is to come up with villains. The heroes are, you come up with a hero and you've got him, and every month he's the same hero. But you need a new villain every month, and you're always trying to top yourself. So I had done everybody as a villain, and one day I said, we ought to do somebody who's like a demigod. And I came up with this character, Galactus. Really kind of silly, but Jack made him look good. He's a guy who traveled through the galaxies and he destroyed planets. And he wasn't a bad guy. He only destroyed planets because they provided him with his nourishment. He would drain all the energy out of a planet to keep himself alive. He was huge, and he had this huge spaceship, and he didn't want to harm anybody, but he had to live. So it's like us catching fish. If we're starving, we catch a fish, we eat it. We don't want to hurt the fish, but we need to live. So I had this character, Galactus, and Jack drew the story, but in the story, he drew a fellow on a flying surfboard, flying from planet to planet. I said, who the hell is that? And he said, well, I figured anybody as big and powerful as Galactus ought to have a herald who flies ahead of him to find planets for him. I think that's not a bad idea, but I loved the way he drew this character. This character looked so heroic and so noble and so dramatic that I gave him the name the Silver Surfer. And instead of just a guy flying around finding planets, I made him a philosophical observer of the world and the universe. And I had him talk in semi-Shakespearean and biblical language. He became my mouthpiece for how I feel about a lot of things. I told Jack I want to use this character a lot. And he came to Earth and he would say things like, we live in the greatest planet we could ever want. It has everything. It has clean, fresh air. It has sunlight, moonlight. It has all the water we could need. Most of the planet is water. It has beautiful growing things, all the food we could want, room for everybody. Why do we fight each other? Why do we hate each other? Why is there, what's the matter with us? Are we insane? And the kids loved him. During these lectures, inevitably, mostly at colleges, some kid would get up. Stan, tell us about the Silver Surfer. And do you equate his Judeo-Christian philosophy with that? And they'd get into all of this deep stuff, which I loved. Well, when I would lecture at colleges, inevitably a kid would get up and say, "We've been studying the various incantations of Dr. Strange, and it's obvious that you got them from ancient Druid writings or from this or that." And I hated to have to disappoint the kids by saying, "No, I dreamed them up." So after a while, I'd say, "Well, as a matter of fact, I did do some heavy research." But I found you can't write anything that people aren't going to read things into that you didn't even think of, which is one of the nice things about being a writer. You can often be thought of as being much deeper than you really are.
One of the Fantastic Four's most iconic characters, the Thing, actually derives from Jewish folklore and myth, embodying a representation of the Golem, a man made of clay and stone who was built in order to save his people and protect them. Jack Kirby also introduced the character of the Watcher, the seemingly immortal giant alien god from the skies who looks down and sees and witnesses all of creation around the universe. The Watcher actually ties directly with the apocryphal biblical stories of the Watchers, who in the Book of Enoch are the angels tasked to be witnesses to humanity's upbringing. They were meant to be those who watched over the children of Adam and Eve. Unlike the Marvel's Watcher, who has sworn to never interfere, the Watchers in the Book of Enoch have fallen from the heavens and actually mated with human women. This ancient story is actually tied to scripture in the book of Genesis, where the figure of Enoch is taken up to heaven by God, and the women who bred with the angels on earth would bear children who were giants and monsters. It was said that these monsters would actually rise up the ranks and become heroes of legend, like Goliath and many others. Jack Kirby really does lean heavily into the strange interspecies humanoid breedings. There's many experiments that are shown in Thor by the High Evolutionary, who his sole purpose is literally to make his own Earth, his own people, his own humans who follow him. The writer Roy Thomas would then later echo many of Kirby's ideas within his own work, especially with Jack Kirby's character, Him. He is not really given another name other than Him, and later he is named and rebranded as Adam Warlock that we know today, basically representing the ideal man who is completely separate from emotion. Since he doesn't believe in right or wrong, but the character was rewritten to be a little bit more godly, the perfect man embodying the messianic figure of the Old Testament. Kirby's work was not limited to its time, and as I stated, it was later taken up by Roy Thomas, who would turn this into a more Christian and more biblical story. Later on, it was even built upon more so by the creator of Thanos, Jim Starlin. Adam Warlock has clear connotations to that of the biblical Adam, who is the fallen Christ. He is basically the Christ who failed, the Messiah who failed, the Son of God who failed, whereas in Jesus is the good version. He is the Son of God who succeeded and slayed death and the devil alongside him. Throughout the rest of his career, Jack Kirby is absolutely obsessed with these kind of stories, always alluding to bigger-than-life characters, ancient gods, and things that are unknown to the world, such as in the Inhumans and the Eternals. These characters mix all of those ideas perfectly. These would also later be echoed within New Gods and the Forever People, such as Infinity Man, Miracle Man, and many more. Kirby's profound engagement with mythology and religious symbolism extends beyond surface-level storytelling. His ability to imbue superhero narratives with deeper, often spiritual undertones allowed his works to resonate on multiple levels, engaging both casual readers and those searching for more profound meaning. Truthfully, I've only analyzed these stories from what Kirby has said and from my own objective understanding, but that is where the beauty of creation and art is found. We are open to making many things that can speak many different meanings to many different people. It is always open to interpretation and is always a wellspring of knowledge. That's why these ideas have been in our culture for so long. It is no wonder that Kirby had to draw inspiration from these things because they were so prevalent. You have to understand that these stories, these myths, these biblical scriptures are the foundations of society as we know it. They truly are the building blocks of the human mind and really do speak on many different levels. And even though nowadays there is a really strange stigma around biblical stories and scriptures from old, stories like the Iliad and the Odyssey written by Homer were so profound for their time. The Bible and all of these ancient Greek and Italian myths are really the things that help people learn. You have to understand there wasn't much around. The Iliad was carried around by Alexander the Great, and many people have actually learned to read and write just by reading scripture and poems. So symbolism, we have to give it more credit because it's still something that we could take and derive meaning from and add it into our own work. This is really speaking just to directly the artists and writers who are listening to this, but if you're just listening to it casually, you have to remember that whatever entertainment that you're looking at, it always has a deeper meaning. Whether you want to acknowledge it or not, it is there. Jack Kirby's storytelling was not just confined to blending mythologies, but also involved the creation of new myths that echoed timeless themes. His characters often grapple with existential questions, moral choices, and the search for meaning in a universe filled with both wonder and terror. We'd always interpret these ancient ideas through a lens of science fiction, blending the ancient and the modern. The mythological and theological allowed Kirby to create stories that are not only entertaining, but also deeply thought-provoking. By weaving these complex themes into the fabric of his narratives, Kirby and Stan Lee have transcended the genre of superhero comics and invite readers to explore the deeper connections between myth, religion, and the human condition. His stories are a testament to the power of myth and symbol in shaping our understandings of the world and our place within it. Ultimately, we have to remember that though Jack Kirby and Stan Lee are greats, we have to do our research and learn what it is that inspired the people who inspire us today. We have to remember that art is always a reflection of ourselves. Whatever it is that we read and whatever it is that we take away from that is a deeper reflection of our understanding and subconscious. I personally strive to make stories like this because it seems that the world is lacking true, meaningful entertainment. So if you guys love Jack Kirby and if you guys love old school cartoons, then you'll absolutely adore my self-published comic book titled Junket: Hidden Worlds Revealed. It is only available on Amazon, so please show some love and help support the channel. So don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe, hit notifications on to stay updated, and let me know if you guys would be more interested in objective mythology and theological undertones within modern day comics. Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget that God loves you and everyone around you, and that you have a chance to make a difference in this world. One drawing at a time, one word at a time, one action at a time. So don't be afraid and go take a risk. This has been Ray Raynette signing off from Farlook Studios. I'll catch you guys next time. Peace out.